Prime Minister is certainly committed towards fiscal reform. I mean, coincidentally, it was when he was last Minister of Finance that we had a surplus budget. But beyond being a fiscally responsible budget, I think the Prime Minister is also keen to ensure that the budget also sets the tone in terms of reform to achieve his economy Madani framework, which, amongst others, promotes for new sources of growth, which are both inclusive and sustainable.
So on the raising revenues side of the ledger, a capital gains tax on unlisted shares, how much is that going to do? And also taxing luxury watches. I mean, do people buy that many watches in Malaysia? I don't know.
They're quite surprisingly popular in Malaysia as a tourist destination in terms of luxury goods. But I think what it first identifies is in terms of Malaysia having a relatively low revenue with regards to GDP. It's at 11.8%, which obviously favors lower than our regional peers, which are 13 and above. That's probably one of the key reasons why we do need to, in terms of fiscal reform, in terms of bringing down our deficit, one, to widen the tax base, and secondly, in terms of also, as you mentioned, better targeting the subsidies away from what is currently more blanket in nature.
Secretary General, this is JP Ong. It seems that now, with regards to subsidies, it's not a question of how much you're spending, but actually implementation and enforcement, making sure that the subsidies get more efficient and get to those who need them in a more efficient manner. Just how is Malaysia planning to do that, from fuel to food and the whole gamut of subsidies that you roll out? Just how is Malaysia planning to make sure that these subsidies actually get to the people who actually need them the most?
So Prime Minister's also, emphasized how in many cases the subsidies benefit those who perhaps shouldn't. Quotes, for example, for our electricity subsidy, we found that when it was given on a blanket basis, the top 10% were getting more than 50% of the subsidy. And so what was started this year was more targeting in terms of those with higher consumption, those where the subsidies were released, but the lower income and the lower consumption, those subsidies were maintained. So that's one step, and that will continue to be reinforced in the next year. But other areas which the Prime Minister highlighted was a gradual removal of both chicken and egg subsidies, even in terms of diesel, taking a similar approach. Perhaps the logistics sector, which does obviously have an impact on price of goods, those will continue to be subsidized, but gradually the pump price in Malaysia will generally be increased for diesel.
Right. The reason Malaysia was able to roll out the generous subsidies during the COVID-19 pandemic is because we actually saw revenues from the commodity boom actually support Malaysia's trade surplus. However, we've seen commodity prices actually come down significantly, and there are expectations that the dividends expected from Petronas might actually come in lower than what was the year prior. How is Malaysia planning to at least diversify or pivot away from this waning commodity boom if they want to sustain some of these revenues, sir?
No, we certainly committed towards reducing our dependence on Petronas. Dividends in 2022 was 50 billion. This year down to 40 billion, and next year we're projecting to reduce that further to 32 billion. So certainly there's a gradual reduction, but that is why the importance of efforts made to widen our tax base, as you mentioned. We've announced the increase in terms of our sales and services tax on top of the capital gains tax. In addition to that, also the targeting subsidies, those are necessary as we seek to reduce our dependence on oil-related revenues.
Right. Development expenditures, sir, coming in at just about $19.1 billion US dollars. Which industries or social security measures is this meant to be channeled towards in 2024? And what is the midterm or long-term goal actually for some of the expenditures in the development sense for 2024, sir?
We're certainly focusing on health and education as the topmost priority. In addition to that, in terms of basic infrastructure, which includes obviously transportation. So you see in terms of announcements, in terms of Sabah and Sarawak, the roads there still obviously needs catch up. We've announced major projects there. In terms of transportation, also in terms of Penang LRT, those are some of the big infrastructure. In terms of also mitigation, we also announced, I think, major investments in flood mitigation. I think overall, this commitment of 90 billion ringgit in both this year, next year, and the year after, this translates to an increase in the what we call the 12th Malaysia Plan ceiling, which is a reflection that whilst we pursue fiscal consolidation, the government is still committed to really invest to support the enablers for growth and in terms of welfare of the people.